Chapter 1. Walking along, one day, Elizabeth's mind was engaged, thinking of Mr. Darcy's peculiar behaviour since his arrival in Kent, in comparison to the way he behaved when he was in Hertfordshire. One might think he admired her, but Elizabeth knew better. Such a thing was impossible, even if her intimate friend, Charlotte Collins's niece, Lucas, whom Elizabeth was visiting, speculated it was true. Her opinion of the gentleman was formed the instant he spoke those unforgettable words at the Meryton Assembly all those months ago.
"She is tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me."
She preferred anything other than wasting her time thinking about the proud man, and thus she retrieved Jane's last letter from her pocket and started reading it for the second time that day. Dwelling on some passages proving Jane had not written in spirits, and not paying attention to anything else, she was surprised when she saw, on looking up, that Colonel Fitzwilliam was meeting her. If anyone, she had anticipated seeing Mr. Darcy. She often met him unexpectedly during her rambles in the park. He rarely spoke of anything of consequence, but he always made a point of turning back and walking with her, and thus exposing both of them to awkward silence intertwined with bouts of one-sided conversation. Seeing Mr. Darcy's cousin, Colonel Fitzwilliam, instead, was a welcome relief. He had provided a delightful diversion for her over the past weeks since his arrival in Kent. The Colonel was a gentleman who had everything in his favour, much like Lieutenant George Wickham, the handsome officer whom she had met last autumn. Elizabeth silently chastised herself. She was becoming too much like her mamma and her younger sisters in her agreeable opinion about men in uniforms lately. Putting away the letter immediately and smiling, she said, "I did not know before that you ever walked this way, sir."
"I have been making the tour of the park," he replied, "as I generally do every year. I intend to close it with a call at the parsonage. Are you going much farther?"
She shook her head. "No, I should have turned in a moment." Accordingly, she did turn, and they walked towards the parsonage together. "Do you certainly leave Kent on Saturday?" she asked.
"That I cannot rightly say. Darcy keeps putting it off. I can only suppose his reasoning has to do with the presence of a particular young woman."
"Oh?"
"Come now, Miss Bennet, you need not pretend to mistake my meaning. Judging by my cousin's behaviour of late, you made quite an impression on him when the two of you were in Hertfordshire."
First Charlotte and now the Colonel, Elizabeth silently pondered. She could not deny that Darcy was changed since the first time they met. Mr. Wickham had said that he was agreeable among those he considered his equal in consequence. On the other hand, he had called on the Collinses not long after his arrival. Not once had he given himself the trouble of calling on Longbourn, even though his amiable friend Charles Bingley had done so at least twice. In Hertfordshire he never gave himself the trouble of walking with her either, and now it was almost a daily occurrence. "Sir, at the risk of spreading rumours, it is incumbent upon me to tell you that I find the gentleman's behaviour here in Kent to be in striking contrast to his behaviour in Hertfordshire. His character was fixed the first time everyone saw him at an assembly after his arrival in Hertfordshire, and he did nothing that would give any of us to think we were mistaken. In addition, there was the appalling manner in which he treated his former friend, Lieutenant George Wickham."
"I should hate to think your bad opinion of my cousin is the result of anything George Wickham had to say. Let me recommend you, as a friend, not to give implicit confidence to all his assertions of Darcy's using him ill, for such allegations are perfectly false. On the contrary, he has always been remarkably kind to him, though George Wickham has treated Darcy in a most infamous manner."
Mr. Wickham gives a very convincing account of how Mr. Darcy went against the late Mr. Darcy's wishes in denying him the living in Kympton when it became available. The gentleman huffed.
"Did he also tell you that he came to Darcy citing his desire to pursue a profession in the law, stating his lack of desire to take orders, and requesting the value of the living instead, to which Darcy agreed by paying him £3,000. Did he tell you that he came to Darcy requesting more, which led to a violent altercation and a cessation of all future harmony between them?
Frowning at this unflattering account of one of her favourite gentlemen, Elizabeth cried with energy, "If what you say is true, why didn't Mr. Darcy expose Mr. Wickham's story as being false?" Elizabeth then recalled the time she and Mr. Darcy had spoken of the lieutenant. He had been visibly rattled when she boasted of her recent acquaintance with the gentleman. A deeper shade of hauteur overspreading his features, at length Mr. Darcy had responded to her purposeful taunt in a constrained manner.
"Mr. Wickham is blessed with such happy manners as may guarantee his making friends. Whether he may be equally capable of retaining them is less certain."
Her emphatic reply came to mind. "He has been so unlucky as to lose your friendship, and in such a manner as he is likely to suffer from all his life." Mr. Darcy might very well have defended himself at that moment, but he had chosen not to. Instead, he had made no answer, and had seemed desirous of changing the subject. Perhaps it was not in the gentleman's nature to say more, Elizabeth thought, now taking into consideration the Colonel's words.
"I am confident that if my cousin knew your opinion of him was damaged by anything Wickham had to say, then he would have. As I said, I know him well enough to know how ardently he admires you. I can think of no other reason to explain his putting off our departure other than he is in your power."
Elizabeth did not care for the Colonel's insinuations, and she sought to put a stop to his misguided speculations with the excuse of wanting to complete an errand in the village. Walking away from the gentleman, Elizabeth's mind was more distressingly engaged with what the Colonel had said than where she was going. She veered from her usual path in favour of a shorter route. Looking back and seeing the Colonel still standing there, she did not notice the fallen tree branch in her path. She stumbled and fell. Noticing this, the Colonel raced to her side.
"Are you quite all right, Miss Bennet?"
Elizabeth held her hand up. "I am more embarrassed than anything else, sir." Attempting to stand, yet unable to do so on her own, she winced in pain. She placed her hand on her ankle. The Colonel dropped to his knees and offered his assistance. Thinking only of her comfort, he applied a bit of pressure to her ankle. Before he could ask how it felt, she cried out in pain.
"You may have suffered a sprain, I cannot rightly say. Nonetheless, you cannot walk. I will have to carry you to the parsonage house."
In spite of the pain, Elizabeth abruptly scrambled away. "Sir, in light of the impropriety, I do not think your offer is prudent. What if my cousin, or even worse, your aunt, should hear of this?" True, she liked the Colonel very much, but she didn't flatter herself to think the two of them might make a good match. As the second son of an earl, he was in need of a wife with a fortune of her own. The second eldest of 5 daughters, Elizabeth had no fortune to speak of. A forced union between such a gentleman and herself would very likely involve them both in misery of the acutest kind. Ever the amiable companion, the Colonel understood her predicament perfectly well. He said,
"You will allow me to aid you to your feet so you might limp over and make yourself comfortable in the grassy patch beside the lane. I shall graciously allow you to rest on my coat."
"I suppose there is no harm in that if you and I are quick about it." He chuckled.
You are very stubborn, Miss Bennet. However, in your case, it's more of an endearment than a fault. You are quite unlike any woman I have ever known. It is no wonder my cousin admires you."
Accepting his aid, she released a resigned sigh. "Am I about to be subjected to a long list of your cousin's admirable qualities?" Once assured of her comfort, he said,
"I gather from your earlier remark about Darcy's unfavourable reception in Hertfordshire that your affection for him is wanting. This is a shame, for most of the people of my acquaintance regard him very highly."
"Yes, well, I have heard that he can be very agreeable among those whom he considers his equal in consequence, Elizabeth replied, recalling the words of the agreeable Mr. Wickham.
It is not only those of similar consequence who speak highly of him. He is regarded as the best master, a devoted brother, and a most loyal friend,
Elizabeth said. Perhaps, but do you not also consider that he is particularly fond of his own opinions, and he likes to have his own way? The Colonel replied,
As rich gentlemen generally do. That is hardly a fault in his character.
Elizabeth said, I tend to think otherwise when his whims are pursued at the expense of others. Your uncertainty about his plans for departing Kent is one such example. It is as though he brought you down with him chiefly for the sake of having someone at his disposal. I wonder he does not marry to secure a lasting convenience of that kind, but perhaps his sister does as well for the present. As she is under his sole care, he may do what he likes with her.
No,
said Colonel Fitzwilliam.
That is an advantage he must divide with me. I am joined with him in the guardianship of Miss Darcy.
Are you indeed? And pray, what sort of guardians do you make? Does your charge give you much trouble? Young ladies of her age are sometimes a little difficult to manage, and if she has the true Darcy spirit, she may like to have her own way as well. As she spoke, she observed him looking at her solemnly. The manner in which he promptly asked her why she supposed Miss Darcy likely to give them any uneasiness convinced her that she had somehow given offence. You need not be frightened, sir. I never heard any harm of Miss Darcy. I dare say she is one of the most amenable creatures in the world. She is a very great favourite with some ladies of my acquaintance, Mrs. Louisa Hurst and Miss Caroline Bingley. I think I have heard you say that you know them. The Colonel replied,
I know them a little. Their brother is a pleasant, gentlemanlike man. He is a great friend of Darcy's.
Indeed, let us not forget his friend Mr. Bingley. Mr. Darcy is uncommonly kind to him. One might say he takes a prodigious deal of care of him.
Care of him? Yes, I really believe Darcy does take care of Bingley in those points where he most wants care. From something that he told me during our journey to Kent, I have reason to think Bingley very much indebted to him. But I ought to beg my cousin's pardon, for I have no right to suppose that Bingley was the person meant. It was all conjecture.
What is it you mean?
It is a circumstance Darcy could not wish to be generally known, because if it were to get round to the lady's family, it would be an unpleasant thing.
You may depend upon my not mentioning it. At that moment, Darcy happened along the lane on horseback and saw Elizabeth and the Colonel sitting there. Halting abruptly, he jumped to the ground, quickly secured his horse's reins, and hurried to where Elizabeth and the Colonel sat. Clearing his throat, Darcy said,
Pray, I am not interrupting a private moment.
The Colonel stood.
No, Miss Bennet, in her haste to escape my amiable company, took a fall and injured her ankle. Rather than risk the impropriety of my carrying her to the parsonage house, I offered to sit with her until a more fortuitous rescue opportunity presented itself. Then it is indeed fortunate that I chose this path at this particular time, I suppose. I shall see to Miss Bennet's safe return.
I beg your pardon, sir. I do not imagine it would be any less improper for me to arrive at the parsonage house with you than with the Colonel. Darcy seemed to take umbrage at Elizabeth's assertion.
Pray, you will agree that the two situations are not entirely the same. Besides, I have my horse. You shall ride, and I will walk.
I would never go near that giant beast. How tall is it, anyway? Unwilling to entertain further protest, Darcy walked to where she sat and picked her up, taking Elizabeth as well as the Colonel completely by surprise. In a flash she was sitting astride Darcy's frightening stallion, her pulse racing and her heart swelling with indignation. "Mr. Darcy!" Elizabeth protested.
Calm yourself, Miss Bennet.
But
No buts, young lady. I shall deliver you safely to the parsonage, and then you may thank me properly.
Not knowing what the gentleman might possibly have in mind in making such a bold statement, Elizabeth ceased her attempts to protest. The three of them, Elizabeth on horseback, and Darcy walking beside his horse, with the reins tightly in his grip, and the colonel next to him, made their way slowly to the parsonage house. When they were there, all three of them were silently relieved to find that Mr. and Mrs. Collins were out, the former at the parish and the latter in the village with her younger sister, Miss Maria Lucas, who was also visiting from Hertfordshire. Once Elizabeth was settled in the parlour, neither of the gentlemen was in a hurry to leave on the excuse of not wishing to leave her alone. Her ankle did not hurt as much by now, and not wanting to make a fuss, she saw no need to summon the local physician. A lull in the conversation gave the colonel the chance to pick up where he and Elizabeth had left off before Darcy came across them in the lane. He looked at his cousin pointedly.
Miss Bennet was telling me about your behaviour when you two met in Hertfordshire. I was about to tell her how you saved your good friend from a most inconvenient alliance.
Darcy coloured. Clearing his throat, he said,
I am sure Miss Bennet is in no mood to hear any of that just now.
On the contrary, Elizabeth declared, intrigued by the increasing discomfort the usually staid Mr. Darcy was exhibiting. I can think of no better way to pass the time. Fitzwilliam! Darcy nearly shouted. Calm yourself,
Old man. Besides, Miss Bennet and I were well into the story before you came along. It is not fair to leave her in suspense.
Ignoring his cousin, the colonel turned to Elizabeth.
What Darcy told me was that he congratulated himself on having lately saved a friend from the inconveniences of a most imprudent marriage, but without mentioning names or any other particulars. I only suspected it to be that gentleman we were speaking of earlier, from believing him the kind of young man to get into a scrape of that sort, and from knowing them to have been together the whole of last summer.
Speaking as though the gentleman was not standing a short distance away, his attention apparently fixed on whatever he was staring at outside the window, she inquired, Did he give you reasons for this interference?
I understood there were some very strong objections against the lady.
Still looking at Mr. Darcy's back, she noticed his posture stiffen. Elizabeth continued, What arts did he use to separate them?
He did not talk to me of his own arts,
said Fitzwilliam, smiling.
He only told me what I have now told you.
Her heart swelling with indignation, she spoke in a measured voice. Your cousin's conduct does not suit my feelings. Why was he the judge?
You are rather inclined to call his interference officious, Miss Bennet.
I do not see what right he had to decide on the propriety of his friend's inclination, or why, upon his own judgment alone, he was to determine and direct the manner of his friend's happiness. But, she continued, remembering herself, as we know none of the particulars, it is not fair to condemn him. It is not to be supposed that there was much affection in the case.
That is not an unnatural surmise,
uttered Fitzwilliam. Here Darcy turned and glared at his cousin. Directing his gaze at Elizabeth, Darcy told the colonel to leave, citing his desire to speak with Elizabeth in privacy. In response to the colonel's initial objection to leaving the two of them alone, Darcy said,
I have a matter of a personal nature to discuss with Miss Bennet.
As if unsure of Elizabeth's sudden change in attitude, Fitzwilliam studied her inquiringly.
Miss Bennet?
Elizabeth gave him no reply, but rather turned away. She had other matters to ponder. There could not exist in the world two men over whom Mr. Darcy could have such boundless influence. That he had been concerned in the measures taken to separate Bingley and Jane she had never doubted, but she had always attributed to Miss Bingley the principal design and arrangement of them. Mr. Darcy was the cause. His pride and caprice were the cause of all that Jane had suffered and continued to suffer. He had ruined every hope of happiness for the most affectionate, generous heart in the world, and no one could say how lasting an evil he might have inflicted. Oh, what she would not say to him when afforded the opportunity. Tearing his eyes away from Elizabeth, Darcy turned to his cousin.
"My purposes will be clear when next we meet."
With that assurance the Colonel bid Elizabeth farewell,